Hey guys, and welcome back to the Advanced Animation Academy. For those of you who don't know me, my name is Jerome. I'm a senior animator, animation mentor, and game developer. And what I'm going to be talking to you about today is how to ace interviews. Or more accurately, it's going to be my tips on how you can basically have the best chances of success in your interviews. So without further ado, let's jump into the video and get started. So when it comes to interviews, I think the thing that I should break down is you can expect many different kinds of interviews. There's no one format for all of them because the interview process can vary depending on what studio you're at and also what position you're applying for. So if you're applying for a junior animator position, you can expect a different process compared to if you was to apply for a senior animator position or a lead animator position respectively. So let me give you an example. So when you're a more junior animator or you're landing your first job, for example, you can expect to have, one or two interview stages, maybe an animation test, and then a decision is going to be made. And there's usually going to be very few people involved. You probably have maybe an interview with HR or an interview with the lead animator, maybe another senior animator at the same time, and then you probably be given an animation test, which they would review, and then the decision will be made. Very straightforward, very simple. But then if you go for like a senior animator position, you probably won't get an animation test. Maybe you will, maybe you won't. It depends on the studio. And the reason for that is because you're experienced, you're established, you've worked on projects previously, and you have basically a proven track record, so they don't feel any need to test you. And your showreel probably has a lot more on it that convinces the studio that, hey, we don't need to give this person an animation test. So if you do get a test, if you don't get a test, or if you decide to take them, is up to you. But I'm just letting you know the kind of things that you can expect when you're going for an interview at different levels. And then when you're going for a lead animator position, this is where it changes quite drastically because you're applying for a position that's not where you're not going to primarily be animating. So receiving something like an animation test just simply wouldn't make any sense. It's going to be more about your interpersonal skills, your managerial skills, and how you're going to be able to collaborate and lead the team. So it's a very different job spec. So because of that, the interview process is going to be very, very different. With all of these things, there are some general rules that I have that are going to help you ace basically all of them, no matter what stage you're at. So the very first one is, firstly, I'm going to tell you, if you're in the situation when you've got an interview or you've got several interviews lined up, congratulations, because you've done what I would say to be the hardest part. The hardest part of any application process is actually standing out enough to be called in for an interview. Because as you know, the animation industry, the games industry is very, very competitive. If you're being called to have an interview, it's because your portfolio is stood out amongst others. So firstly, well done. Once you have that interview, obviously it's natural that you're going to feel a little bit anxious because you don't want to mess things up. So the first tip I'm going to give you is to just relax. The way that I've always approached every interview, and maybe this is just a thing with my personality, but when I've told this to my students and anybody else that's asked me for advice regarding interviews, what I found helps is if they just relax. You've done the hard part, and that's the part I want you to acknowledge. You've done the hard part by putting together an animation showreel, putting together an application that is compelling enough to be called in for an interview. You've done the hard part. Now they just want to put a face to the name and ultimately see if you're going to be a good fit for the team personally. So that's where you should basically put your mind frame into that perspective, and that you've done the hard work already. Now this part is easy because you're just going to be yourself. And the second one is obviously show up on time. It's just professional, and it shows just basically good manners and professionalism. Showing up on time. If it's a Zoom call, jump in a Zoom call about maybe 3 minutes before the start of it, so then they know that you're there, you're waiting, and you're not waiting too long as well. If it's an on-site interview, turn up 10 minutes early, all good. So that's my second tip. My next tip would be to just be honest. When you're in the interview, you're going to be asked sometimes some questions that are a little bit tricky to answer, and generally speaking, the questions aren't there to trip you up. What they're trying to gauge, gauge your understanding of your current skills, your experience, your mindset, and just how you're going to fit into the team dynamic in general. The best thing you can do is be honest. All they're trying to assess is, are you somebody that I can see myself working with? Say you're a junior animator and you're landing your first role. You've done the hard part by making an animation showreel at junior level that's compelling enough to get the interview. Now we just want to see like, hey, can you fit into the team? So just relax, be yourself, be honest. And if they ask you a question that you don't know the answer to, simply tell them this. Honestly, I don't know the answer to that question, but I'm more than happy to go away and find it out. Or if it's a piece of technical knowledge that you don't know, just simply say you don't know, but that's something that you're going to make a note of and you're going to look that up and learn it. That's simple. Like, just be honest, because one thing you don't want to do is you don't want to be caught out in a lie, because that doesn't bode well for you. Another thing that I want to mention, this is another tip as well, is that the interviewer is going to ask you a lot of questions, but then you should also prepare some questions that you want to ask them. You need to understand one thing, is that they're trying to see if you're a good fit for the company, but you also need to see if the company is a good fit for you, because it's a two-way relationship. You're spending a lot of time there. You're going to be spending at least 8 hours a day there working, whether you're working at home or on site, it doesn't matter. You're going to be spending 8 hours a day, 40 hours a week of your time. That's a lot of time, effort, and energy. You're going to be dedicating that to them, and they're going to return that to you in a salary plus other benefits. And you need to make sure that lines up with where you want to go in life and what you expect. If you're being offered a salary of whatever the salary is, just make sure that it's in the ballpark of what you should be being offered for this particular role. So when you're quite junior, I'm going to be honest with you, you're going to have to more or less take what you can get, because getting into the industry is hard. It's about getting that experience to begin with. So what are the kind of things that you should be asking when you're going to be asking questions of them? You want to ask things like, what are the company benefits? If these things aren't explained to you already, you want to ask, what are the company benefits? You want to know like what kind of perks you're going to get additional to your salary, what kind of equipment you're going to be given, especially if you're going to be working from home, because there's a lot of remote jobs now. So if you're going to be working from home, you want to know how the equipment situation is going to work out. If you're going to be working on an on-site role, if you live quite far from it, you want to know what the relocation process is, because that's something that's going to be very important for you to consider. If you're going to have to move to another country, or you're going to need to move to a different city in your country, whatever the case may be, you want to get all of that information as quickly as possible so that you can decide whether this opportunity is worth it for you. The next thing you probably want to understand is you want to understand the company culture, what kind of place you're going to be working with, what kind of people you're going to interact with. And of course, company is made up of individual peoples, but every company has a general company culture. So you want to make sure that that company culture aligns with who you are as a person as well. So if you've got a company that is very, I don't know, they don't socialize very much, they don't do a lot of team activities, etc., then, and you're somebody that's quite social, then that company may not work for you, or it may not work for you long term. It might be good for you to get your foot in the door and to be there for maybe a year, 6 months, etc., but long term, you'll find that it's going to clash with your core values as a person. So you want to make sure that the company is a good fit for you, as well as you being a good fit for them. And another thing as well, if it isn't already listed to you, don't be afraid to ask about salary, because the bottom line is, as much as you're very passionate as an animator, you are doing it to earn a living. So don't be afraid to ask about salary. It's not the first thing you want to come out with, but if you've had a first interview and it hasn't come up, and then you have a second interview, then by all means ask the question. Just ask them simply like, what's the expected salary range for this position? Because they should have a bracket based on what they want to employ somebody that's at a junior level, a mid-tier, senior, lead, principal. They should have brackets for these things. And if they're not willing to tell you and be transparent with you, then that would kind of raise a bit of a flag in my opinion. On the subject of animation tests, I'm on the fence about them personally. If you're on a more junior level, I think animation tests are completely necessary. And the reason I say that is because you don't have a body of work, or your body of work might not prove completely that you're able to do the things that this particular studio wants you to do. But if you're somebody that's of a more senior level, you worked on, I don't know, maybe 3 or 4 titles, and then you're being asked to do an animation test, I can understand if you decide to reject it, but I can also understand that if you're at a senior level and you decide to accept a test, it's purely based up to you. But my personal take is that when you're of a more senior level, the need for an animation test isn't really necessary. They're real, and their body of work in their CV should prove that they're good enough to do the job as it is. And I think that's even more applies to when you're going for a lead position, because the role is completely different. To be a lead animator, you already have to be a good animator. To have to take an animation test, that doesn't make much sense to me. And the test should be applicable based on the level of the applicant, essentially. So if somebody that's going to be on a junior level, you should expect to receive a test like, maybe a walk cycle, maybe an attack animation, something that's going to basically be challenging but not too challenging. Ultimately, an animation test shouldn't consume too much of your time. You shouldn't have to spend weeks and weeks on an animation test, because I'll be honest with you, that's just a bad hiring process. But that's my personal take on it. But honestly, guys, that wraps up my thoughts on interviews and basically what you can do to improve your chances and your prospects. Ultimately, just relax, because you've done the hard part by, being asked to have an interview in the first place. And don't worry about how many other people have had interviews or how many other candidates they're interviewing. All you can do is do your best. And actually, that brings me on to my last point. The last thing I'm going to say to you is, do not worry about things that are outside of your control. When you're going for this interview, ultimately, do your best. And so long as you do your best and you know that you've done your absolute best, there's nothing else for you to do. All you can do is believe in yourself, have faith, and carry on pushing forward. I'm going to give you an example, and this is going to be my personal anecdote. It took myself about a year after graduating to land a job in the industry. Well, more like 8 months. But there's been other animators that I know personally that have taken 5 years. There's when I was applying for a mid-tier role, it took me a year to be able to land that role at Creative Assembly. When I was going for a senior role, it took me another year to be able to land that role, so I had multiple rejections. And then now I've gone from a senior to a lead animator position. That took me 8 months to go through, and I had several rejections in that time. So being rejected is honestly just part of the process, so don't let it dishearten you. So that's ultimately my advice for you when it comes to interviews and application processes in general. Guys, if you found this video helpful, what I would appreciate is if you give this video a like, if you would comment below, let me know what you think, and if you would subscribe to the channel, because all these things are going to let me know that these are the kind of videos that you guys find helpful, and it lets YouTube know the same thing as well. It also encourages me to make more too. One last thing I'd like to mention is that if you're an aspiring animator or you're a professional animator that is looking to advance their skills, please check out the Advanced Animation Academy. The Advanced Animation Academy is an online school that is dedicated to helping animators improve their skills and land the jobs of their dreams. I've helped several animators do so already, and you could be next. So check out our courses, check out our mentorship. Honestly, it's a deal of the decade, and you don't want to miss out. So yeah, that's all I have to say for this video. It's been a pleasure as always, and until next time, take care.